Hey everybody, today I am taking a look at 5 board games that didn't quite make the cut when it came to staying in my collection. Some of them missed it by a narrow margin and some of them missed it by quite a large margin. Now before I get started on these 5 reviews, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so let's get started with Manila. Now this is a 3 to 5 player game that takes 60 minutes to play according to the box, but personally I would say it's a bit quicker than that. Now this is a kind of a bidding and wagering style game where you are going to be spending cash betting on these different spots here. So essentially you have 3 of these boats that are going to be sailing up this track. At each round you're going to be rolling these dice and they're going to determine how far these boats move. But essentially you have different actions you can take. So what you can do is you can bet on a certain number of boats making it to the end or not making it to the end. You can actually sit on the boats themselves, and if you make it to the finish, then you'll get your share of the spoils based on how many people are sat on those particular boats. And you can even kind of go all in on these little hijack spots, where if somebody lands directly on a certain spot, then you can kind of kick them off their boat and take their place. Now the game does have some additional mechanisms that you can add in, such as bidding for the captaincy. So basically each turn you're going to have a slight auction where the winning player will kind of commandeer the ships and start the ships at different spaces. So if they've got a high investment in a particular ship type, then they might want to push that further along to increase its odds and chances of winning. Additionally, it does have this kind of commodity speculation, stocks and shares mechanism, where you can get shares in the different company types based on what the boats can be populated with, which will give you some additional points based on where they stand at the end of the game. Now, I actually think those extra bells and whistles don't actually help the game too much. It feels a little bit too extra, and I don't think it makes the game any more fun. And I do like the premise of this game. I think it's a cool idea, but I do think it has been made better by subsequent games. The game that I most think of is Camel Up, which was a very popular Spiel des Jahres winner, actually. I think Camel Up does this style of game a lot better, because I think the investment and the sense of ownership comes through a bit stronger in Camel Up, and it gets you a little bit more excited, again, invested in those camels as you bet on them, not only short term, but long term. This game does have that in a little bit, but not quite as, not quite as polished, I think, not quite as refined. I just don't think it has those highs and lows like a game like Camel Up has. Additionally, it can be quite frustrating when you might put a lot of investment into something and somebody just kicks you off just by, sheer chance. So in that respect, it does become a little bit jarring too. But it's not a bad game by any means. It just didn't quite hit the spot for me. And I always had that feeling of, I'd rather play Camel Up in the back of my mind when I was playing Manila. But I know this one has its fans. It's got a lovely production, especially if you have the version I have here, but still just slightly missed the mark and has been replaced by another game. So I'll probably give this one about a 5 out of 10 if I was to grade it. Okay, so let's move on to Caesar and Cleopatra, a card game for 2 players. Now, this one takes around half an hour to play. Again, I think the box does say it takes slightly longer than that. And as you can see, this actually comes from the Cosmos line of 2-player games, where some absolute classics have been published, such as Kahuna, Lost Cities, The Rose King, lots of great games from Cosmos. Now, this one is one that's certainly not stood the test of time like those other ones, and after playing it I can probably see why, but this does have some cool things going on. I have to be clear with that, where you are competing for these different kind of senators by playing cards from your hand. Generally speaking, you'll play either 1 card face down or 2 cards face up, based on where you place them, essentially, and you're trying to have the majority in terms of the highest numbers next to those senators. And at the end of your turn, you'll always reveal from this deck of cards which will show which particular senator is going to be scored. And if you have the majority, then you will gain that card. Each card is going to be worth a point at the end of the game. If you have the majority, you'll get some additional points. And if you have all of them, you'll score some additional points again. There's also some hidden objectives that you can try score for, secret scoring at the end of the game. The game does have some additional twists, however, where you can play these P cards, which I think actually is the coolest mechanism in the game, where if you play a P card, all of a sudden that will be changed to who has the lowest total. And because, of course, you can play these face down, you might be luring your opponent into traps by, if you're really after a certain senator, then your opponent might be keeping playing the high cards. You played one of these, you're going to win. However, it does have this cool cancel out mechanism where if your opponent plays a P card and you've already played a P card, then it will revert back to being those positive points or the highest score rather than the negative score. I really like that flow. I think it's a very cool mechanism, and it does that part of the game very well. I also do like that idea of each round you're going to draw from a deck and it's going to show which senator you score, which means that as the game progresses, you can kind of deduce what is going to come up next. But there are these orgy cards in the deck where if a certain one comes out, you're going to reshuffle those cards back together, which can completely change the pacing, because it means that if you, say, score a certain senator, then you reshuffle, you could score that senator again. But if that shuffle card's right at the bottom of the deck, then you're going to go through all the different types of senator before they're scored again. So I do really like that mechanism. In actuality, it's a little bit frustrating because you're always shuffling them up, and it kind of breaks the flow and the tempo of the game. But I'm willing to forgive that because, I do like the way that it works in practice mechanically. The biggest kind of pitfall, in my opinion, of this game is the bonus cards. So basically, you have your standard numbered cards, or these P cards, but you also have these action cards in the game, which I think they're very heavy-handed, and I think they're a bit clumsy and actually ruin the game experience. So, for example, this one says, remove all influence cards from one group, both yours and your opponent's. Yeah, that's kind of cool in the right scenario, but it does feel like it's a bit forced and a bit too powerful if you have it in your hand and your opponent doesn't. Search your opponent's hand and select one and remove it from the game. So for a game that works well mechanically, I think those other cards just feel, again, a little bit too, I don't know, I'm not going to say Ameritrashy, but again, a little bit too heavy-handed for the rest of the game, in my opinion. But that, for me, was enough to bring it below the threshold of me willing to keep hold of this one, because I just don't think it's quite up to scratch with a lot of the other two-player games of this nature. I'd rather lean towards something like, as I said, Lost Cities, or maybe a Battle Line, if I want this classic feeling, majority tug-of-war style game. This one's, again, not a bad one, but it's not as good or refined as those others either. So, again, I'd probably give this one a 5.5 out of 10, maybe a 6 on a good day. That is Caesar and Cleopatra. Okay, so let's move on to Lutece. This is a 2 to 5 player game that takes around 45 minutes to play. Now, the main mechanisms here are set collection and bidding. So you're doing bidding through this simultaneous card play, which is a mechanism I tend to enjoy. But for me, games like Lutece are the most difficult for me to review, and that is because there's nothing really wrong with it. I can't think of a particular mechanism or anything in particular that I don't like, but at the same time, it just leaves me wanting, it leaves me feeling a little bit numb because the game is just a bit dull, to be honest. So for me, this one feels so generic, and it feels like I've played it 50 times before in different iterations. So essentially this one, you are going to be playing these cards from your hand in order to pick up these cards from a common pool, essentially. And these cards will score you points in different ways, score X amount of points, plus 1 point for every one of these symbols you have, or that symbol you have. We've all played games like this. And, to be honest, this one is perfectly adequate. It works as it should do, but there just isn't that extra spark. There isn't something special about this one. I suppose, if anything, I do quite like the management of your cash, because of course you need cash to buy more cards. but at the same time, in order to generate more cash, you have to give up bids. Essentially, you have to sacrifice picking up cards for the round, because some cards you play will simply just give you money, which can help you going forward. I also do quite like this bidding mechanism where, despite selecting a card and revealing it simultaneously, you can bolster those bids by placing coins on top of them, but of course your opponents don't know which one you are bolstering, and are they going for the same card that I'm going for? Maybe they are, so I'm going to up my bid. You flip the cards and it reveals that you're going for something completely different, and you've just wasted your money. So I do like the way that works. Again, it has a nice flow to it. Again, the set collection mechanisms are just a little bit too standard. I do feel like it needed an extra step or something additional to differentiate it from the sea of filler set collection games out there. It looks nice, it flows pretty well. Some relatively good choices, I suppose. But all in all, it just left me wanting for more. And to be honest, you can play a game like Nidavellir, which has some similar crossover, or some crossover with a game like Lutece. For me, that's a much richer, a much more polished and sophisticated game than Lutece is. It's just a much more fun, to be honest, and you can play in around the same time frame. So, if I can play Nidavellir in 45 minutes, or I can play Lutece in 45 minutes, then I'm not going to think twice about choosing Nidavellir. So that is Lutece. Again, not bad by any means, but it needed a certain spark. It needed something extra to make it stand out. So again, I'll probably give this one maybe a 4.5 or 5 out of 10 for those reasons. Okay, so let's move on to Ankhor. Now, this is by Sebastian Pauchon, actually, who's a designer I really enjoy. This one is around 30 minutes to play and accommodates 2 to 4 players. Now, this is a kind of game that reminds me of Splendor in a way. I'm sure we've all played that game. So essentially you are collecting these tokens, and these tokens will allow you to cash them in order to pick up these tiles. And what you're trying to do with these tiles is you are trying to create these patterns by connecting either like colours or like symbols together, and essentially if you have at least 2 together, then you'll score that many points, but if you get to 5, you'll get some bonus points as well. Now, the puzzle itself is pretty lackluster, to be honest. I think there's so many cool ways you can make puzzles nowadays, and this one is simply put these tiles together and try to create chains of them. If you want, you can place one on top like this to touch all of those 4 tiles. That's like the only little wrinkle to the puzzle. I think of games like Framework, games like Nova Luna, they do these puzzles in such a more interesting way and a more dynamic way. This one just feels like a means to an end. Collect token, collect token, collect token, buy the tile you want, place the tile in an obvious place. So that's pretty much what the game entailed. Very weak choice-wise, I think. It just felt a little bit obvious about what you should do. And it even had a bit of a weird game flow where the tiles don't automatically replenish themselves, and you actually have to collect these Ankh'or tiles in order to refill the row. It does get rid of the furthest leftmost one, which means you can sometimes mess with your opponent in the right circumstances, but generally speaking, it felt like, well, okay, if you're not going to do it, I'll spend one of my Ankhs in order to refill the row, and we'll start again from scratch, start collecting tokens. So, again, it's not like a terrible game or anything, it's just very, very dry, or just dull as dishwater, really. Not really much to sink your teeth into. Just a means to an end. Going through the motions, collect, cash in, collect, cash in, and place these tiles in an obvious place. So, despite the lovely production, good artwork here, even some good design pedigree, the game is just, again, very, very basic and almost feels AI generated. It's that predictable. So this one, probably the weakest of these I've spoken about so far. Probably give this a 3, maybe a 4 out of 10 on a good day. So let's move on to the final game, which is Kiri-ai the Duel. Comes in this nice little wallet. Think of a button shy style game. It's around the same size of that, so certainly small, only a few cards in this one. This is a 2-player only game. Takes somewhere between 10 or 15 minutes to play on average. Now, the cool thing about this game is that it's it replicates a duel of samurai. So basically you've got the blue samurai and the red samurai, which are going to represent each of the players. And you're going to have an identical hand of cards, which will show your movement on this kind of track, as well as the attacks you can make. The idea is that you want to hit your opponent twice before they hit you twice, and you'll instantly win the game. Now you do have these bonus cards as well, which you're going to get a random one of those at the start of the game. That will give you some more unpredictable abilities because your opponent doesn't know which exact card you have in those. But I don't think I really need to go into those, and I can explain the premise of the game with these other cards. So you can see that these cards have a bunch of different information on them. So the first thing is the stance you need to be in order to do this particular attack. So you have the kind of sword up stance like this, or you have the sword down stance like this. And in order to do these particular attacks, you need to be in that relevant stance. So you can see in this one, I need to be in the lower stance, which I am, and this would attack one space away from me. You've got other ones as well that let you move backwards or let you move forwards. Ones that let you hit several spots away, providing if you're in the upper stance, and so on. So as you can imagine, your opponent needs to be in the right spot in order for you to execute this particular attack. This one here lets you attack on the exact spot you're on, but it can be performed in any of those stances. That one gives you a little quick dash, and that one lets you switch stances. So essentially, yeah, you're going to keep on simultaneously revealing these cards, moving around the map, trying to hit each other. If you both attack at the same time, your swords will bounce off each other, and none of you will deal that blow. I suppose the cool thing about this game is that you cannot keep on doing the same thing, because each turn you're choosing two cards, and one of those cards will kind of be held in reserve for the following turn. So you have to be careful about what you use and what's going to get held up, because your opponent will know that and know which card is not in your mix for the following turn. So essentially this is an elaborate version of paper, rock, scissors. It's nothing more than that really. Of course there are those additional twists, but it does come down to trying to guess what your opponent's going to do, and kind of getting into the head of your opponent, luring them into traps, and so on. Now, I've had really good games of Kiri-ai, ones that have felt edgy and tense, and I've had games that have been complete duds where in the first couple of cards I managed to hit my opponent and just win the game, which falls incredibly flat. At the same time, I've had games that seem to just drag on to no end because we cannot land that final blow, and you just keep on doing the same thing over and over and over until hopefully something or someone will make a mistake and you'll land a blow. So in terms of being hit or miss, this game is right up there for me, and generally speaking nowadays I want games that are going to be hitting all of the time. I don't want to take a gamble if a game is going to be good or not, because I've only got so much time and I've got so many games in my collection that I want games that are going to be bankers and going to always guarantee me fun. So I think some people are going to like this one. I think some people are going to struggle to find the game in it. I'm somewhere between the two there. I do see its upside, but I also see its downside. And again, I want all my games to always be on the upside. So this one hasn't quite made the cut for that reason. If anything, I suppose people are going to understand how this works. They're also going to like the fact that it comes in such a small little wallet. So it's good. It's a good little portable game that you can take on holiday with you, or just shove in your pocket and just smash out a game anywhere really. But bear in mind that it can be a throwaway game and it can be frustrating at times if the game just drags on to no end. So this one, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. If I've had a really good game of it, that might slightly change to slightly above or slightly below if I've had a bad game, but I'm going to average it out at around a 5 out of 10 for Kiri-ai the Duel. So there we have it, that concludes the video. 5 games here that didn't quite land for me. Of course, some closer than others. Ankhor, a big no-no. Lutece, boring. Caesar and Cleopatra, some good aspects, some aspects I'm not too keen on. Kiri-ai, very hit or miss. And Manila simply being replaced by another game. But hopefully you've enjoyed the video and found value in it. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.